Welcome to Whispers and Confessions. There might be a twist waiting, so please make sure to watch until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Let's begin right away.
Daniel watched her with eyes full of wonder and curiosity, his pupils shaking and his breathing becoming ragged. The sudden rush of excitement made my body heat up. My wife is being seen like this by another man. The strange thrill of the situation surprised even me. I approached Gina and said, "This is how it's done, Daniel. Watch closely." I placed my hand on her head and kissed her deeply on the lips. Her lips were soft and warm, and with the alcohol in my system, my head spun even more. Hi there, I'm Jeffrey. I'm 53 years old this year and have been working as a supervisor at construction sites for nearly 30 years. My wife, Gina, and I have been married for 25 years. Both of our kids are grown and on their own, so it's just the two of us in a cozy suburban home in New Jersey. Gina works as a nurse at a local hospital with a warm and caring nature that everyone admires. Our marriage has always been a source of comfort, built on years of mutual support and laughter. Even after the kids grew up, we've stayed busy with our respective jobs, spending weekends shopping together or occasionally taking drives to nearby areas. We were just an ordinary couple until that all changed this past spring when an unexpected encounter shook up our routine. "Mr. Jeffrey, thanks for your help today," a young voice called out behind me as I was about to leave the construction site. Turning around, I saw Daniel, a new employee who joined this year, standing there with a slight bow. His face was marked by a long, sweaty day of work, but his eyes still shone with energy. "Ah, Daniel, how was the site today? Getting the hang of things?" I asked with a smile. He scratched his head a bit and replied, "Yes, I'm learning little by little, but I still feel bad for troubling the seniors." Daniel is 21, fresh out of college, and this is his first time working at a construction site. He's got a good build, but his innocent, youthful face still gives off a rookie vibe. Though it's been 3 months since he started, he's diligent in his attitude toward work and completes tasks as instructed. He can be a bit bold at times, but I think that's just part of the charm of being young. I patted his shoulder lightly and said, "Don't worry about it. Everyone's clueless at the start. When I was young, I got scolded a lot by my seniors too." Daniel looked up at me with a surprised expression and said, "You don't seem like that at all, Mr. Jeffrey. You always look so calm and perfect." I chuckled and replied, "Hey, don't judge me by how I am now. After 30 years on the job, anyone can do their part." Daniel smiled brightly, and for some reason, that smile stirred a sense of nostalgia in me. Come to think of it, my eldest son used to smile like that, full of youthful energy. Now he works at a company in New York, and I only see him a few times a year, but the memory of those days warmed my heart. Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking up. Mr. Jeffrey, would you like to grab a beer after work today? I'd like to hear more about reading blueprints, like you taught me last week." I couldn't find a reason to refuse his offer. Having a drink with a young subordinate isn't anything unusual. In fact, it's a common way to bond over work. But for some reason, the idea of drinks with Daniel sparked a strange sense of anticipation. There was something about his innocent yet passionate gaze that caught my attention. We headed to a nearby bar, talking about work over beers. Daniel opened up about his worries, listening closely to my advice. "To be honest, I'm worried that if I mess up, it'll impact the whole team." I nodded and said reassuringly, "Just take it one step at a time with a calm mind. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how you fix them." Seeing the seriousness in his eyes reminded me of my younger self, and I couldn't help but smile. Out of curiosity, I asked, "Daniel, how's life outside of work? What do you do on your days off?" He hesitated a bit, looking down at his glass before answering, "Not much. Since I live alone, I do laundry or clean, or just play games and watch YouTube. I don't really have any special hobbies." "What about a girlfriend?" I asked with a playful smile. His face turned slightly red as he fidgeted with his glass and replied, "No, I don't have one. Actually, I've never had any experience." He spoke in a small voice, avoiding my gaze and lowering his head. I was a bit taken aback by his unexpected confession. Sure, he looks young and innocent, but I didn't expect him to be so candid about his lack of experience. I smiled gently and said, I see, but don't worry too much about it. You'll meet someone great someday. A hardworking guy like you definitely will. Daniel looked up with a slightly anxious expression and said, but I get worried that if I stay like this, I'll never meet anyone. At work, it's all guys, and I hardly get a chance to meet women. It's true that our construction industry is male-dominated, and opportunities to interact with young women are scarce. He hesitated for a moment, his face growing even redder, before continuing. And honestly, I feel frustrated because I don't know how to deal with certain feelings piling up inside me. I remember feeling that way too, as a young man trying to figure things out. I patted his shoulder lightly, giving him an understanding look, and said, I get it. I went through that too when I was young. But don't rush it. Things will work out naturally when the time comes. As our conversation deepened, closing time at the bar approached. We were both pretty tipsy by then, especially Daniel, whose face was flushed and speech slightly slurred. I glanced at my watch and said, it's almost time for the last train. Want me to get you a cab home? Daniel shook his head with a reluctant expression and replied, thanks, but I'd like to drink a bit more. I want to talk some more. I thought for a moment before suggesting, how about we continue at my place? It's more comfortable than staying out late. His eyes lit up with excitement as he asked, is that okay? I don't want to inconvenience your wife. It's fine. Gina's a considerate person. Don't worry, I assured him as I called home. Gina agreed without hesitation and even said she'd prepare some simple snacks. Her warm, caring tone made me smile. When we got to my place, Gina opened the door with a warm smile and greeted us. Welcome home, honey. This must be your young colleague. I nodded and introduced them. Yeah, this is Daniel, the new guy. Thanks for having him. Daniel, looking a bit nervous, nodded politely and said, hello, I'm Daniel. Thanks for having me. Gina smiled warmly, extending her hand, and said, I'm Gina. Make yourself at home. I've prepared the shower for you. You must have worked up a sweat at the sight, so freshen up first. Daniel looked surprised and asked, a shower? Gina laughed softly, gesturing toward the bathroom as she explained, yes, both of you must be sweaty from the sight. A quick rinse will make the beer taste even better. Gina always pays attention to the little things. Daniel, looking apologetic, nodded again and said, thank you so much. I gave him a gentle push on the back and said, go on, Daniel. I'll help set up some snacks in the meantime. He cautiously made his way to the bathroom. While he showered, Gina and I set up the table in the living room. She brought out beer along with a cheese platter and potato chips, smiling as she said, he's cute. Seems so innocent. I nodded and replied, yeah, he's hardworking and honest. He reminds me of myself back in the day, so I can't help but find him endearing. Gina gave me a teasing smile and said, that's good to hear. You haven't had much chance to talk with young people lately. This kind of interaction will be good for you too. It's true that as I've gotten older, my interactions with younger generations have decreased. Talking with someone as genuine as Daniel felt refreshing and enjoyable, lifting my spirits. When Daniel came out of the shower, towel drying his hair, he looked revitalized. His young skin seemed to glow after the shower. I looked at him and said, feeling better now? I'll go take a quick shower too. While I showered, I couldn't quite settle my mind. Thinking about Gina and Daniel chatting alone in the living room gave me an uneasy feeling, though I couldn't quite place why. What could they be talking about? The thought crossed my mind, making my heart beat a little faster. When I came out of the bathroom, I heard their cheerful laughter from the living room. The table was set with snacks and cold beer. I walked over to Gina and said, thanks, Gina, for preparing all this. She smiled brightly and replied, no problem. Talking with Daniel made the time fly by. Daniel, looking a bit shy, held his beer glass. Gina sat beside him, her eyes full of curiosity as she asked, Daniel, I heard you played volleyball in high school and even went to nationals. I looked at him in surprise and said, "Oh, really? I had no idea." Daniel scratched his head and answered, "Yeah, but I didn't continue in college. I focused on part-time jobs and studies instead, trying to save up and build a future." I nodded and said, "That explains your good physique. It suits you for site work." And so, we kicked off another round of drinks, the three of us together. Gina joined us in drinking beer, and the conversation flowed naturally. She listened eagerly to Daniel's stories from his school days, while I shared some of my own work anecdotes. There was this one time a crane broke down, and we nearly had a major accident. I climbed up and fixed it myself. My seniors were really impressed with me back then, I said with a proud laugh. Daniel listened with admiration. Time flew by as laughter and stories filled the room. As we kept drinking beer, I started feeling pretty drunk. My head was spinning a little, and my body felt flushed. Amidst that, I suddenly recalled the conversation we had at the bar earlier. With a playful smile, I looked at Daniel and said, "By the way, Daniel, remember what you mentioned earlier? What was it again?" He looked confused for a moment, but soon realized what I meant, blushing and lowering his head. Gina looked at me with curiosity and asked, "What story is that, honey?" I laughed and said, "Daniel said he's never had any experience with women." Daniel blurted out, embarrassed, "Mr. Jeffrey, why'd you say that?" His voice a mix of shock and nervous laughter. Gina smiled gently and said to him reassuringly, "Don't worry about it. A great guy like you, Daniel, will meet someone wonderful someday. There's no need to rush." Daniel looked at her with a slightly uneasy expression and said, "But what if I'm still like this in my 30s or 40s? I don't know what to do." Gina comforted him with a warm gaze, saying, "It's okay. Life is long. Just wait until you meet the right person." Gina has a knack for putting people at ease like this. But as the alcohol took over, my thoughts became sluggish. My body felt restless, and unfamiliar thoughts started creeping into my mind. In my drunken state, I moved closer to Gina and put my arm around her shoulder. Feeling her warm body through my fingertips made my heart race faster. Gina looked at me with a slightly surprised expression and said, "Jeffrey, stop it. Daniel's here." She tried to calm me down, but I didn't care. "It's fine. We're all adults. I just want to be closer." I kissed her neck, feeling a rush that made my head spin even more. Gina, looking a bit embarrassed, gave Daniel an apologetic look and said, "Sorry, Daniel. He gets like this when he drinks." Daniel looked flustered but didn't get up to leave. Instead, I noticed a curious glint in his eyes, almost like anticipation. Reading that look, I impulsively said, "Hey, Gina, let's show him." She looked at me in shock and asked, "Show him what?" Caught up in the drunken moment, I continued, "Let's show Daniel. It'll be educational for him. Let's show him how we express our love as a couple." Gina's eyes widened even more as she whispered, "What are you saying?" "Stop it, Jeffrey." But in my drunken boldness, I reached for the buttons of her blouse. Being so close to her made my heart race faster. Gina, embarrassed, said to Daniel, "I'm sorry, Daniel. He's really drunk." Then something unexpected happened. Daniel, in a small but desire-filled voice, said, "No, I'd actually like to see." "Really?" Gina looked back and forth between me and Daniel in astonishment. "Are you two serious about this?" Her voice was a mix of confusion and hesitation, but perhaps swayed by the heat of the moment. She slowly began unbuttoning her blouse herself. Her hands trembled, but somehow that made the moment even more intense. The mood in the room shifted in an instant, charged with a tension I could almost feel in the air. As Gina shyly took off her blouse, her smooth skin came into view. Her curves looked even more beautiful under the light, and I couldn't help but stare, holding my breath. Daniel watched her with eyes full of wonder and curiosity, his pupils shaking and his breathing becoming ragged. The sudden rush of excitement made my body heat up. My wife is being seen like this by another man. The strange thrill of the situation surprised even me. I approached Gina and said, "This is how it's done, Daniel. Watch closely." I placed my hand on her head and kissed her deeply on the lips. Her lips were soft and warm, and with the alcohol in my system, my head spun even more. At first, Daniel just watched, but he gradually moved closer. I could hear his breathing getting nearer. Gina seemed flustered by the situation but didn't resist. Her eyes held hesitation, yet there was also a hint of curiosity. I looked into her eyes and asked, "Gina, is this okay?" She hesitated but gave a small nod. "Yes, it's okay." Her voice trembled, but that small consent fueled my excitement further. Gina looked at Daniel gently and said, "Daniel, be gentle. Since it's your first time, take it slow." His eyes sparkled as he nodded. I had intended to teach Daniel about love with a woman, but in reality, I found myself swept up in an unexpected thrill. Gina let out breaths in a higher pitch than usual, her sounds filling the room. Seeing Daniel's nervous expression, his trembling hands, and my familiar wife responding to a young man's touch stirred complex emotions in me. Did I have this kind of desire inside me? I was astonished at myself as I got more and more drawn into the moment. Unable to hold back any longer, Daniel started to make a move, reaching out to Gina. He hesitated before reaching out, overwhelmed as he murmured, "I can't believe this." His face was bright red, and his breathing got heavier. Looking up at Gina cautiously, he asked, "Is this okay? Can I do more?" She smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, it's fine. Take your time." He carefully began to explore her sensitive areas with his lips, and even with his clumsy touch, Gina trembled slightly in response, her breaths becoming hotter. She stroked his head and whispered, "Keep going, like that." Her voice was soft, guiding him with patience. Watching this, my chest burned with heat. I moved my hand to Gina's lower body. Her skin was hot and already damp. Her reaction was far more intense than usual. Surprised, I looked up at her and said, "Gina, this is incredible. You're so wet." She blushed, mumbling shyly, "Don't say that. It's embarrassing." But there was a hint of excitement in her voice. I called Daniel over and said, "Daniel, come here. Feel this." I guided his hand to Gina's lower body. With unfamiliar movements, he explored her, making sounds as he stirred, bringing his lips close to taste her warm fluids. Gina tensed, her breathing quickening as the intensity of the moment filled the room. My heart felt like it would burst watching her. Then Gina, catching her breath, sat up and reached for Daniel. He flinched at first, but soon melted into the sensation, surrendering himself with a look of pleasure. Slowly, she moved closer, showing him a tenderness he hadn't expected. Daniel let out a shaky breath, whispering, "This is incredible. I've never felt anything like it." His face was flushed red, and his breathing grew even more ragged. Moments later, Gina lay on the floor, lifting and spreading her legs as she looked at him. Her gaze was gentle, reassuring him to take his time. "Daniel, it's okay. Come here," she said with a smile, beckoning him. He looked at me with an apologetic expression, his eyes a mix of hesitation and desire. I nodded and said, "Daniel, it's fine. Go on. She's waiting for you." Slowly, he moved toward Gina, drawn in by her. What followed was so overwhelming for him that he seemed to forget I was even there, merging with her in motion until exhaustion took over. Their breaths and her moans intertwined, filling the room with intense heat. Watching them, I was engulfed by complicated feelings. Instead of jealousy, an intense excitement gripped me. I never imagined that seeing my wife with another man could be so stimulating. Eventually, we all fell asleep, exhausted. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to some noise. Beside me, Gina and Daniel had started again. I heard Daniel's quiet plea, "Gina, please, just once more." Gina exhaled hotly and whispered softly, "Okay, it's fine." I stayed still, pretending to sleep. I thought I'd feel anger or jealousy, but instead, I felt an unexpected excitement. Their hushed voices and subtle movements were clear in the darkness, and I couldn't look away. A strange thrill coursed through me, mixed with a pang of confusion I couldn't shake. The next morning, the three of us returned to our usual routines without a word. Daniel politely said goodbye and left, and Gina and I had breakfast without mentioning the night before. But the atmosphere was undeniably different. A subtle tension and quiet thrill lingered in the air. A few days later, on my way home from work, Daniel approached me. "Mr. Jeffrey, can I come over again?" His eyes showed a clear longing. I hesitated for a moment before calling Gina. After a brief silence, she replied softly, "Sure, it's okay for him to come." From then on, Daniel started visiting our house almost every weekend. Sometimes the three of us spent time together, other times it was just him and Gina catching up. He was completely caught up in these new experiences, often staying late into the night. Gina would smile at him and say, "You're full of energy, Daniel. I envy your youth." She, too, seemed to find a new kind of joy in responding to the pure desire of a young man. Her eyes seemed brighter, and she carried herself with a renewed energy. Sometimes, I questioned myself about what I was doing. Normally, a husband would be devastated if his wife were involved with another man, especially a young subordinate I introduced. Yet, I felt a strange satisfaction. Seeing Gina so full of life and laughter made me happy, and watching Daniel grow into a man was rewarding. One day, on the way home, Daniel asked in a small voice, "Mr. Jeffrey, are you really okay with this? With things continuing like this?" I looked into his eyes and asked, "With what?" He hesitated before answering. "With Gina and me, having an adult relationship. Am I being too greedy?" I shrugged and said, "If everyone's okay with it, isn't that fine? You look happy, and Gina seems to enjoy it too. That's what matters." Daniel smiled, seemingly relieved, and nodded. "I'm really grateful to you and Gina. I've gained some confidence, and life feels more meaningful now." I patted his shoulder and said, "Daniel, you're like a son to me. With a bit more experience, I'm sure you'll find a great girlfriend." He nodded, but I could still see the lingering desire for Gina in his eyes. As summer turned to fall, Daniel had grown into someone who could pull his weight at the sight. His progress was impressive, and even the more experienced guys started giving him props. "Daniel's going to be a key player in construction in the future," my boss said, and I felt proud. It wasn't just because he was my subordinate. There was a special bond due to our complicated relationship. But just as seasons change, so do relationships. One day, after work, Daniel approached me. "Mr. Jeffrey, I have something to tell you." His expression was serious, with hesitation in his eyes. I tilted my head and asked, "What's up?" He paused before saying, "I've got a girlfriend now." For a moment, I was at a loss for words. I felt joy mixed with a bittersweet ache, a slight pang in my chest. "Oh, congratulations. What's she like?" I asked with a smile. He grinned shyly and said, "She's a nursing student who lives in my apartment building. We met by chance in the elevator. Her name is Emma." His face radiated the pure joy of love. I nodded and said, "That's great. She sounds like a wonderful person." Daniel lowered his head slightly and continued, "Yeah, so, I don't think I'll be coming over to see Gina anymore." I smiled and replied, "I understand. You don't need to come anymore. It's a good decision." He nodded with an apologetic look. "Thank you so much for everything. Because of you and Gina, I've gained confidence. I think I can do well with Emma too." I patted his shoulder and said, "Daniel, you're a great guy. Cherish her." He answered firmly, "I will, definitely," his voice full of determination. That night, I told Gina about Daniel's news. She looked a bit wistful, but smiled softly. "That's nice. Daniel found someone good." I nodded and said, "Yeah, she's a nursing student in his building named Emma. She must be a great person." Gina replied with a warm gaze. "That's wonderful. I'm sure she's a lovely girlfriend." She looked thoughtful for a moment before asking, "Was what we did wrong?" I shook my head and said, "No, it wasn't wrong. It was something we all wanted. Plus, Daniel was happy and grew from it." Gina smiled with a distant look in her eyes. "You're right. I'm glad it turned out this way. We can keep it as a memory." That night, we reconnected more deeply than usual, holding each other close in a way we hadn't in a while. It felt as though the memories of that summer had reignited a closeness we'd almost forgotten. After that, Daniel continued to work diligently at the site, occasionally sharing stories about Emma with me. Their relationship seemed to be going well, and I often saw them out together on weekends. Gina kept working at the hospital and supported me at home as always. We rarely spoke about that summer again, as if it was a chapter we both understood without words. One weekend night, Gina and I went out for dinner, something we hadn't done in a while. I went all out and booked a nice restaurant in New York City, even though it wasn't a special occasion. Gina looked puzzled and asked, "What's this about? Is something up?" I smiled and said, "Nothing special. I just thought it'd be nice to do this once in a while." Truthfully, there was a reason. I had heard that Daniel got engaged. When he told me himself, I congratulated him sincerely. At the same time, the memories of that summer came flooding back vividly, the strange bond that formed between the three of us. A mix of nostalgia and knowing we couldn't relive those days stirred a quiet longing, making me want to take Gina somewhere special. She took a sip of wine and smiled. "This is delicious. It's been so long since we've been somewhere like this." I nodded and said, "Yeah, a little splurge isn't bad once in a while." Our conversation flowed naturally, touching on everyday life and plans for the future, updates on the kids, retirement ideas, places we wanted to travel. Everything felt calm and comfortable, like slipping into a familiar rhythm. At the end of the meal, I brought it up. "Gina, Daniel got engaged." She paused for a moment before smiling softly. "Really? That's something to celebrate. He's become a fine man." I nodded and said, "Yeah, Emma graduated from nursing school and starts working at the same hospital next month. You might even run into her." Gina replied with a warm look. "That's nice. If I do, I'll treat her normally." Her expression seemed to hold a hint of wistfulness mixed with sincere happiness for him. I asked in a quiet voice, "Do you regret what happened that summer?" She thought for a moment before shaking her head. "No, I think it became a precious memory for us and for Daniel." After a pause, she added, "And our relationship changed after that, didn't it? I feel like it's grown deeper." She was right. After that experience, a deeper trust and connection had grown between us, a bond we didn't need to explain. I took her hand and said, "Thank you, Gina." She looked at me curiously and asked, "For what?" I smiled and replied, "Just for being by my side." She smiled softly, reaching across the table to hold my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I feel the same." On the way home, snow began to fall quietly. Gina looked up at the sky with a dreamy expression and said, "It's beautiful." I looked at her and replied, "Yeah, it really is." But I wasn't looking at the snow. I was looking at Gina's profile. She still had the same beauty as when we first met, a woman who could turn heads without even trying. She was my pride. Back home, we sat side by side on the couch, sipping wine in silence. No words were needed. We understood each other completely, as if our hearts spoke for us. That night, we held each other close for the first time in a while, rediscovering a forgotten warmth and recalling the memories of that summer. It felt like we were reaffirming each other's presence. The following Monday, I passed by Daniel at the site. He greeted me brightly, and I responded as usual. To an outsider, nothing had changed between us, but we both knew there was a special connection. With a wide smile, Daniel said, "Mr. Jeffrey, I'll send you a wedding invitation soon. Please come with your wife." I nodded and replied, "I'm looking forward to it." I meant it sincerely. I truly wanted to celebrate Daniel's happiness, proud of the man he'd become. Walking home under the sunset, I headed toward another new day. Through the changing seasons, my love for her remained steady, a quiet anchor in an ever-shifting world.